Hey, Bruce Naylor here, your boomer consumer. I love vintage audio gear, and I wanted to make a video explaining why I've invested the time and money acquiring all this stuff because it's one of the questions I get asked quite frequently. On my channel, I talk a lot about two-channel hi-fi audio gear. And the question comes up, why are you buying this 30, 40-year-old stuff when the new stuff is so much better? Well, I wanted to make this quick video to explain my reasoning behind it. And if you go on YouTube, you're going to find a lot of people that are devoted to vintage audio. And maybe you've heard some of these reasons before, but this is my take. First, let's talk about price. Let's get that right out of the way. Not everybody can afford the very high-end gear that's on the market. A Luxman amplifier for $10,000, the big Yamaha integrated amp for $6,000, $8,000. Not everybody's got that kind of budget. And I'm looking as much at specifications, power, and performance for the prices I can find. And thus, that led me to looking at used gear on places like eBay, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. I live in a small town. We don't really have shops, thrift stores and all that to go looking around, but that's what we have to work with. And when I wanted to get a powerful receiver, because I like receivers personally, and I love the looks of the vintage stuff, I found a refurbished Pioneer was it the SXD7000, which is like the top of the line Pioneer receiver back in, I think, 1982, 120 watts per channel, 0.005% total harmonic distortion. By the way, that's when 120 watts per channel was a true 120 watts per channel. And refurbished has all been recapped, the whole 9 yards. I picked it up for under $1,000. To get that kind of specifications out of a modern integrated amplifier, minus features like a tape loop, 2 tape loops, and an audio processing loop, well, you get the idea. You can't even find new integrated amplifiers with a tape loop, for example, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. The bottom line is this has got excellent specifications on it and be very hard to beat given the price tag of modern equipment. You can pick up a very powerful 75 watt per channel, 100 watt per channel realistic receiver from the 80s for a few $100s on eBay. That's actually a smoking good deal. And these are well-made devices for the price. Let's talk about the quality of vintage gear. This stuff was built to last. It was built to be serviced. It was built to be repaired. Thus, you can find 40-year-old receivers, turntables, cassette decks, reel-to-reels that still work 40 years later. I challenge most of this stuff you're going to find at, say, Best Buy and other places, the black plastic crap that's for sale. Is that really going to hold up 40 years? I really don't think so. I just don't think those are going to hang in there because they weren't built with being serviced in mind. They're built to be used, and then when they die, you throw them away and get another one. Now let's talk about accessories. With vintage gear, you can find things like cassette decks, reel-to-reel recorders, sound processing gear. This kind of stuff just doesn't really exist in the modern equivalents. You can't, for example, I don't know of any integrated amplifiers or preamplifiers or receivers that support a tape loop today. All right? And that's a big deal. If you want to have a graphic equalizer, if you want to use reel-to-reels for recording and play and monitoring playback, if you want some of this great analog gear other than a turntable, you're kind of hurting in the marketplace. But this stuff, the vintage stuff, still has all these options available. And it's not hard to add Bluetooth to an old receiver or integrated amplifier. It's not hard to even add AirPlay. I have a video how I picked up like a $50 Airport Express, and now I have AirPlay 2 enabled on my vintage receiver. It's not hard to bring it up to you know, for things like streaming, etc. Now, another thing is style. And let's face it, most of this stuff on the marketplace looks exact big black pieces of plastic. No style. You know, the vintage stuff, you know, like my Pioneer collections, the Fluoroscan's got the nice blue VU meters on it, Fluoroscan meters on it, silver face. You got the nice machined knobs on it, solid mechanical switches. You can get them with the old time VU meters. They're just as much a work of art and furniture as possible. And in my opinion, is beautiful to look at. May not be your thing. I get that. But for many of us, we're putting this in our home and we want something that looks nice. And this stuff can be just absolutely stunning, especially at night. It's really a sight to behold to watch all this stuff. It's mesmerizing to watch it all go. You really don't get that in a lot of the modern gear today. Let's talk about design to be serviceable. Let's just touch on that for one moment because that's going to lead into the cons section. This gear, this 40-year-old gear, is designed to be serviceable, to be worked on, to be restored, to be improved. Not on the new stuff. Again, most of this is, you know, use it, dies. You don't take it to someone to repair it. You throw it away and get a new one, and that's just that's unfortunate. Are there cons to buying vintage gear? Absolutely. Almost all of it that you find for sale on eBay or a thrift store or wherever is going to need work. The capacitors on these are electrolytic. After about 20-year life expectancy, you can expect to replace the capacitors. They really need replaced. At least tested to make sure that they're still within spec. They may still kind of work, but they're wildly out of specification. Many of them had transistors in them that were known to fail, maybe heat related. That can be a problem as well. The tuning may be out of whack on them. If you have a cassette deck, the belts may have turned to a goo. The motors have sat there not used for years. They may be bound up. The whole transport system might need to be taken apart because you're not only dealing with the electronics, you're also dealing with the mechanical as well. Speakers may need to be refoamed or the crossovers, again, may be shot. There could be a lot of problems. I'm not really fond of vintage speakers. There's some out there, but for the most part, the electronics on vintage can be repaired, but if you buy them used, you're going to have it serviced if you want to get the best quality, if you want it to last. Now, that leads me to my next point. Let's talk about seller refurbished. If you go on eBay, there's seller refurbished. All right, God, I could make a separate video about this. Many of these folks are in the business of locating this stuff. They spray it, they take it apart, clean it up a little bit, maybe spray some deoxit on the potentiometers and on the switches, button it back up. Hopefully, maybe they might replace a few bulbs on the lights. That's their idea of refurbishing. And they want a premium price for that. The problem is they didn't go through and run tests on all the capacitors. They didn't replace the caps. It's not been recapped. Transistors not been replaced. Diodes not replaced. You see my point? These are truly not, to me, refurbished means as good as new. Performs as well as it did the day it was taken out of the box the first time. That is not be leery of that stuff, okay? Be leery of seller refurbished, okay? Ask the hard questions. You say it's refurbished in the ad, but what did you really do? Do we have a parts list of what got replaced? Odds are many of these guys really didn't do a true they just cleaned it up a little bit. Hey, it works. No, don't. Yeah, be very, very leery. A seller refurbished vintage gear. I did get a seller refurbished receiver, And the guy backed it up. Hey, you have problems, you let me know. If you're going to look at sell refurbished, make sure that you get the work that was done on it. And if they're willing to accept it as a return if it wasn't. Another problem, of course, no warranty. If you're the kind of person that needs that feel good at having the warranty, by all means, stay away from vintage gear, get brand new. Simple as that. Let's talk about features. Vintage gear lacks many of the features that modern gear has. No built-in Bluetooth, no built-in streaming, no built-in subwoofer out, to name a few of the things that may not be there. Digital signal processing, not there, etc. Not even remote control. And I get that. You don't get those things. Now, for many of them, you can overcome that. There's workarounds and things you can do to add these features back. You can get a Bluetooth receiver to add to your vintage gear. You can add AirPlay to your vintage gear. You can connect a streamer to it if you wish. So you can kind of add those features back. That ultimately adds to the cost. Speaking of costs, when you look at vintage gear, keep in mind it's going to need service. So you have to add the price of a proper service to that gear, to the acquisition cost of that gear. And it can cost a lot of money. Let's take a vintage cassette deck or reel-to-reel. They are very cool devices. Most people, what the heck are you doing with cassettes? I made a video about that. You can pick up a vintage cassette deck for just a couple $100 that works. But try to find somebody that's willing to actually service that. Find somebody willing to replace the belts, the idler, the tire, the pinch rollers. Parts is a big problem, especially with vintage reel-to-reels, cassette decks, etc. They're simply not made anymore. And what was on the market has all been used up. So that's a problem. So parts availability for anything mechanical from 40 years ago, next to impossible to find. But on the electronic side, there are still plenty of companies that make capacitors and all the other electronics parts to fix and service the vintage gear. There is one last pro that I want to mention. If you get the gear, a collectible piece, and you keep it serviced and maintained, you take great care of it, the market is just going to keep going up and up and up on it. There has been a nostalgia, a wave of people interested in collecting vintage audio gear. So that is driving, that's both a pro and a con. If you're trying to buy, it's a con, right? The prices keep going up, 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 up. All right, because the scarcity, as more of these things end up in landfills, destroyed, gotten rid of, they become more scarce commodity, and especially if interest in collecting those goes up, up, up. Price, supply, demand kind of thing. So hopefully I shopped well with my Vintage Pioneer Fluoroscan system, and I believe as long as I keep it maintained and serviced, it will continue to rise in value. I feel that I am getting excellent specifications and I don't have a fortune invested in it. And that is why I spent the time, money, and effort to collect and put together a vintage hi-fi system. Now, I want to know your opinion, vintage versus modern. Let me know in the comments down below. Bruce Naylor, your Boomer Consumer. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.